Ladies and gentlemen, Yigal Cohen, CEO of the Ghetto Fighters House, Ada Tushband, President of Yad LaYeled France, Dr. Boaz Cohen, Head of the Holocaust Studies Program, Western Galilee College, colleagues, friends, and most especially the Holocaust survivors who we are so honored to have in the audience today. Shalom, and welcome to the Ghetto Fighters House International Conference marking the 25th anniversary of Yad LaYeled, the Children's Memorial Museum. A conference that was supposed to take place last year, but because of COVID, had to be postponed indefinitely. But we did not want to wait any longer and decided to go forward with an online program. We are grateful for our partners, the Western Galilee College and Yad LaYeled France, for your support and encouragement. The subject of today's conference is the Jewish child during and after the Holocaust, research and pedagogy in a changing world. The past year has taught us all that the world is constantly changing, and we are challenged every day. This is especially true for those who are dedicated to education and to Holocaust remembrance. We have invited experts in Holocaust research and Holocaust education, as well as representatives from major Holocaust museums, institutions, and centers to discuss these challenges together as international colleagues. More importantly, we want to use this platform to put a spotlight on the world of Jewish children during the Holocaust and to continue to tell their story from generation to generation. I want to wish everyone an interesting and thought-provoking conference. And now I am honored to invite Yigal Cohen, CEO of the Ghetto Fighters House, to deliver his opening remarks.
Dear guests, friends, and partners, the Ghetto Fighters House expresses its deep sorrow for the tragedy which took place last Thursday on the Meron Mountain. We wish to comfort the grieving families and hope for a speedy recovery of the injured. I am honored to open this conference that marks the 25th anniversary of the Ghetto Fighters House Children's Museum, Yad LaYeled. It is a very moving, special museum, unique in the way it presents the Holocaust to children, but also in the way it presents the world of children during the Holocaust to all other visitors. Yad LaYeled is marking its 25th anniversary, but I feel the display carries with it the wisdom of experience of many more years, wisdom born by the child survivors of the Holocaust, those rare remnants of all communities who were gathered and cared for to recover some of their lost childhood. Their life stories have accompanied Yad LaYeled from its foundation to this day. Also, embedded within Yad LaYeled's walls is the inspiration of the legacy of Janusz Korczak and Sefa Wilczynska. I feel reverence and a sense of pride on a mission to lead Yad LaYeled together with my colleagues and our partners, both in Israel and abroad. We are dedicated to creating another 25 years of innovative and diverse educational programs that will continue to reach the hearts and souls of our young visitors, teaching them, helping them to understand, and most importantly, inspiring them to make the world a better place for all. I would like to thank all of the staff of the Ghetto Fighters House, and especially the Yad LaYeled team and Meidin Shachar for creating this conference. Thank you, Ada Tushband, the President of Yad LaYeled France, for your support and partnership. Thanks to all the guests, lecturers, academics who shared research and took part in the conference. A special thanks to you, Dr. Boaz Cohen, for building and enriching the conference. Thanks to all the past partners, contributors, and directors of the Ghetto Fighters House, the friends of the Ghetto Fighters House and Yad LaYeled. Without you, there would never have been such a special place. Thanks to all who envisioned and realized the dream.
Thank you, Igal. I am honored to invite Dr. Boaz Cohen, head of the Holocaust Studies Program, Western Galilee College.
It is a real honor for me to stand here at the opening of the conference on the Jewish child during the Holocaust, research and pedagogy in a changing world. The Holocaust Studies Program of Western Galilee College is a strong ally of Ghetto Fighters House. Actually, it was because of the existence of Ghetto Fighters House Museum that the trustees of the college thought that it will be important to have an academic program of Holocaust studies. We work very closely with Ghetto Fighters House. Our students are acting as young guides in the Yad LaYeled Museum. We have a fellowship program for students there, working with students with Germany also. We are cooperating on a lot of subjects. We have good allies and good friends. We make a point of bringing every guest we have to Ghetto Fighters Museum, and especially to Yad LaYeled, which I think is a most unique institution. I also owe some of my research accomplishments or openings to Yad LaYeled, because when work was done on the former exhibition of Yad LaYeled, I had a good chance of being in the museum and learning a lot, being open to new sources, children's testimonies. So for us, as Western Galilee College Holocaust Studies Program, and for me, as Boaz Cohen, a researcher of children in the Holocaust and after the Holocaust, it is really an honor to stand here, and I wish us all a very successful day.
I'm honored to now invite Ada Tushband, President of Yad LaYeled France, to address us.
Hello, everybody, dear friends. We are pleased to welcome you today as co-organizers of this conference. Our association, Yad LaYeled France, was created at the same time as the project of the Memorial Museum, and even before the opening, we committed to support it and to promote its original pedagogy. For the past 25 years, the French Friends of Yad LaYeled have been enthusiastic about the innovative ideas developed by this institution to tell the story of the Shoah at the level of children. The educational initiative cannot be separated from the history of the place in which it was created, the Ghetto Fighters House. On the same side, the Center for Humanistic Education functions as an extension of the Yad LaYeled Museum, bearing the same values and driven by the same concern to draw universal lessons from this human tragedy, the Holocaust, what we call La Shoah. We have had the great pleasure of following each stage of the development and transformation of the Yad LaYeled Museum. Each of its initiatives has guided our inspiration. The emblematic figure of Janusz Korczak, central to the museography. The temporary exhibition, we have adapted the exhibition following the path of a picture for the French and German-speaking public. This material still circulates in schools in France, Austria, and Switzerland. We have taken dozens of French teachers and inspectors to Yad LaYeled Museum for training courses so that they could discover by themselves, in the context where it flourishes, this innovative pedagogy. I could also talk about the beautiful adventure of the translation into French and its publication in a prestigious Parisian publishing house of Lineke's notebooks, a precious archive of the Yad LaYeled collection. And we have been keen to support the museum's projects, in particular, the renewal of some of its equipment. We hope to be able to accompany it for a long time to come. Dear friends of Yad LaYeled, in the name of the French Friends of Yad LaYeled, I wish you to continue your necessary actions with full success. This conference will be an opportunity to measure the international echoes of 25 years of actions. I want to add a personal memory that will always bring me back to Yad LaYeled with affection. In the year 2000, we celebrated the bar mitzvah of my last son in the Korchak Hall. With emotion, Jonathan committed himself to transmit the memory of the Jewish children during the Holocaust. Such a link unites us. You can count on our loyalty, and support for at least the next 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ada, for your kind words. And really, you have been, Yad LaYeled France has been with us the whole journey, and we are absolutely looking forward to the next 25 years with the organization. Thank you all for your kind words and for your blessings. Yad LaYeled Children's Memorial Museum, the first Holocaust Children's Museum, was founded 25 years ago. After many years of planning with no map to follow, the museum is located on the same campus as the Ghetto Fighters' House, which is the first Holocaust museum in the world, established by Holocaust survivors, concurrently with the kibbutz by the same name, on April 19th, 1949, the 6th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, in which some of the founders themselves had played an active role. The initiative to create a children's museum began in the 1960s with the founders of the kibbutz, and the planning stage involved survivors, historians, psychologists, media experts, and educators, of course, educators, both from Israel and from around the world. It took a global village. The physical connection between museum and living community was the concept of those Holocaust survivors who established the kibbutz and the museum. The goal was to establish a memorial for their family and friends and fellow Jews who perished in the Holocaust, and at the same time educate future generations about humanity's most tragic historical event. Yad LaYeled, whose full title is The Living Memorial to the Jewish Children of the Holocaust, is an extension of this concept. Its purpose is to provide children with a meaningful and stimulating meeting with the Holocaust, as well as memorialize the million and a half Jewish children who perished in the Holocaust. Located near green fields, the bustling Akko Nahariya highway, and the restored walls of a Turkish aqueduct, Yad LaYeled is most definitely an integral part of the Israeli society and landscape that encompasses it. Over the past 25 years, Yad LaYeled has been in the forefront of Holocaust education with innovative programs and pedagogical methods adapted to the museum space, but also beyond its physical walls. Multimedia installations, including audio and video testimonies, are an integral part of the museum experience, as well as creative art workshops and theatrical plays. From the start, our professional and dedicated educational staff keeps in mind the needs and abilities of our young visitors, which are changing at warp speed faster than we can imagine. Thousands of children have visited the museum, both from Israel and abroad, and Yad LaYeled has been involved in many innovative projects throughout the years, and I think Ada Tushband mentioned a few of them, and there are many more. I want to take this opportunity to thank all those who have taken an active part in the foundation and development of Yad LaYeled. The list is very long. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the staff, both present and past, for their commitment and nonstop energy and creativity, as well as the directors who all left their mark and still do. Miri Kedem, Tali Schneer, Anat Carmel, Michal Sedan, and Chava Cohen, who is with us today. Most of all, I would like to thank the survivors who gave testimony and told their personal stories. You have made and continue to make an impact on the lives of our young visitors, as well as all those who have visited Yad LaYeled and continue to visit. And now, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Professor Zehavit, who will present a lecture on reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance, international perspectives on challenges and ramifications. Professor Gross is head of the Graduate Program of Management and Development in Informal Education Systems in the School of Education, and is the UNESCO Berg Chair in Education for Human Values, Tolerance and Peace, Bar Ilan University. She is also the head of the Sal Van Gelder Center for Holocaust Research and Instruction, Bar Ilan University. She was the president of the Israeli Society for Comparative Education from 2016 to 2019, and is honorary research associate at University of Sydney, Australia. Her main areas of specialization are Holocaust education, peace education, interfaith education, and religious education. Her research focuses mainly on socialization processes, religious, secular, feminine, and civic among adolescents. And on January 28, 2016, she was invited to the United Nations to participate and give an address in a special discussion on the future of Holocaust education all over the world. In 2015, she published with Dol Stevik, As the Witnesses Fall Silent, 21st Century Holocaust Education in Curriculum, Policy, and Practice. She is the recipient of the 2016 Ursula Thrush Peace Seed Award of the American Montessori Society and a research grant for the years 2016-18 from the Harry S. Truman Research Institute for the Advancement of Peace at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She is also the recipient of the 2017 Distinguished Scholar Award from the Religion and Education SIG at the American Education Research Association. She has recently received a prestigious award from the Israeli Science Foundation to conduct a research on the construction of a reflective culture of remembrance among Arab and Jewish students in Israel until 2021, this year. She is also the recipient of the Good Work Award in 2017 from the Association of Moral Education. In 2020, she received the Israeli Hope in Higher Education Award from Ben Gurion University. Her latest publication is Migrants and Comparative Education, Call to Re-Engagement. And I have to say that I'm so honored to have you here with us today, Professor Gross. The floor is yours.
Zehavit, ich jetzt hier unmute.
Professor Gross, you have to press on unmute. Okay, you're good.
So thank you very much, dear Madin Shachar, dear Igal Cohen, dear Dr. Boaz Cohen. Thank you very much for inviting me. Mazal tov, mazal tov, mazal tov. In this presentation, I shall argue that in the 21st century, Holocaust education and the memory is gradually weakening, and I shall suggest an approach to ensure the continuation of its relevance. This year, on Holocaust Memorial Day, I participated in events where either the attendance was poor or mainly consisted of older people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s. At one major event in which a VIP from the Ministry of Education was supposed to attend, the hall was empty, despite intensive publicity for the event. The popular singer, who will remain unnamed, left in disgust. This reflects the fact that perhaps the Holocaust is no longer of interest to young people, neither in Israel nor around the world. There is a gap between the strong desire of the establishment in various places in Israel and across the globe, which invest considerable effort in various ways to promote Holocaust commemoration, and the desire of the younger generation to participate in memorial events. However, once the economic potential disappears and the establishment is unable to fund it, the issue of Holocaust remembrance will have no future. In responding to this dilemma, my lecture is divided into 4 parts. First, I will discuss the difficulties that I have identified in preserving the memory of the Holocaust in the education system in Israel and around the globe. Then I demonstrate how this is a global problem. Then I will shed light on the number of aspects related to Holocaust education as it is expressed in Israel in various population sectors, in the Jewish and Arab sectors in Israel. And I will propose a new pedagogical concept that I call a reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance. Finally, I will summarize the topic and show how this new concept can address the challenges that the preservation of Holocaust memory presents to us. First, I shall discuss the reasons for the erosion of the memory of the Holocaust. We are at a dramatic turning point in the future of remembrance, since the passing of generation of survivors has a dramatic impact on their retention of memory for the following reasons. First of all, the testimonies of the survivors served as witnesses, bringing the memory to the fore. all the studies have demonstrated that the survivor testimony is the most significant educational element that has contributed to the transformation of Holocaust education into a meaningful learning experience. With their authentic stories, the survivors were able to conjure up the sounds, sights and smells, taste and experience that they went through, but the impressive holograms at museums, as well as recorded testimonies of the survivors, failed to convey the same messages, causing significant damage, erosion, and loss. Contact with survivors created a direct feeling of commitment towards the memory of the Holocaust, but the generational distance undermined this. The survivors insisted on the preservation of Holocaust memory with all their might. They personally contacted policymakers and demanded commemoration, and the establishment was unable to resist their pressure. They were the best advocates to mediate its importance. The survivors financed the educational commemoration of memory out of their own pockets. Once the funding is exhausted, no educational or political system will invest in it because of other priorities. The second thing is the problem of the time perspective of adolescents. In addition, students have a limited time perspective. When it comes to issues that are light years away from them, they are unable to connect to these events. Today, there are school children who are fourth or fifth generation of Holocaust survivors. An Ashkenazi student from a high school in central Israel said to me apologetically, "What do you want from me? The subject of the Holocaust, is very remote for me. My grandmother told me that her grandmother was in Bergen-Belsen. So how can you expect me to have some kind of mental connection to it? It's remote. I'm sorry that I can't feel an actual close connection to the subject." The third thing is family proximity. Empirical research shows that Holocaust remembrance is mainly of interest to people who have a family connection. In general, an individual whose family was not personally involved does not feel a commitment to it. However, with the passing of the generations, this family connection is weakening. And the fourth reason, the political use of the subject of the Holocaust. Over the years, the subject of the Holocaust has become an issue of a distinctly political nature, mobilized for the purpose of promoting social agendas of a right or left-wing nature. This politicization of the Holocaust has alienated many people due to their reluctance to identify with one political agenda or another. Loss of the relevance of the subject of the Holocaust. Teachers reported difficulty in making the topic relevant to their students who perceive the topic as having no importance for the real existential world. Students today are exposed to severe economic crisis, social crisis, and severe climate crisis, and are experiencing contemporary catastrophes that dim the profound impression left by the Holocaust in the previous century. Now, following the COVID-19 pandemic, they will lose much more affinity for Holocaust remembrance. However, as recent research has demonstrated, this is not just an Israel issue. The Claims Conference has undertaken 5 studies of Holocaust education, including of France, Austria, Canada, and the United States. In the United States, they found that there was a significant lack of knowledge about the Holocaust. As well, 70% of adults believe that fewer people care about the Holocaust today than they used to. The study also found that nearly 1/3 of all Americans, 31%, and more than 4 in 10 millennials, 41%, believe that substantially less than 6 million Jews were killed, 2 million or fewer, during the Holocaust. while there were over 40,000 concentration camps and ghettos in Europe during the Holocaust, almost half of Americans, 45%, cannot name a single one. And this percentage is even higher amongst millennials. A similar lack of knowledge was found in the Claims Conference survey of Austria. The majority polled did not know that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. Another problem found in Germany and elsewhere is that while official government policies stress the importance of Holocaust education, teachers found that in some cases, there was strong resistance among students to studying the topic, and that students could manifest anti-Semitic and racist ideas. Although this was the case in different segments of the population, it was particularly an issue with some Muslim students, as demonstrated in research undertaken in such geographically dispersed countries as Germany and Australia. Now, the profile and challenges in Israel Holocaust education. Israel is facing a number of challenges in terms of Holocaust education in the 21st century. There is a need to find a new way of understanding Holocaust education and remembrance for a number of reasons, including the fact that survivor generation is passing on and that the Arab Palestinian population and other segments of the society, such as Mizrahi, Ethiopian, etc., need to be brought more inclusively into the narrative of the Holocaust as Israeli citizens. In order to respond to this challenge, the aim of my current research project funded by the Israeli Academy of Science, ISF, is to examine how the memory of the Holocaust is processed and mediated for students in schools across the educational spectrum. The Jewish sector, ultra-Orthodox, secular, and state religious, and the Arab community in Israel, and how a reflective culture of remembrance can be cultivated in both educational systems. The results demonstrate that each sector faces different approaches and challenges based on their different ethnic backgrounds and religious or secular ideology. Now, the interviews we conducted elicited a significant erosion in attitudes to the Holocaust among teachers and students in all education sectors in the state of Israel. In ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi schools, the Holocaust is taught rather minimally and is enlisted for the purpose of promoting their specific religious objectives. The main goal is to show how European ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi Jews maintain their observance of Torah and mitzvot, and this is presented to students without providing a solid factual infrastructure and is mostly based on stories without systematic documentation. In the ultra-Orthodox Mizrahi schools, Holocaust education is perceived as an issue that belongs to the Ashkenazim and is not considered interesting for all students. There is no overt opposition to teaching the topic, but it is perceived as a more instrumental curricular need rather than an inherent need in terms of educational values that generates personal or identity interest. In state religious schools, Holocaust education is held to be a central educational value in developing students' religious and national Zionist identity. Holocaust education has a higher place on the school's agenda, and some students and most teachers consider it a significant Jewish activity, a pivotal aspect of the process of instilling Jewish identity. Teachers from secular state schools perceive the universalistic messages central to the teaching of Holocaust as the most important goal, but they found that they have difficulty in dealing with the trauma of the history, that is, how to handle the topic from a pedagogical point of view of difficult knowledge, despite the fact that the Ministry of Education invests a lot of time in in-service training. All history teachers cite the excitement among students ahead of studying the Holocaust. which teachers find difficult to understand and explain. The students refer to their excitement and attribute it to the mysterious of the Holocaust narratives and the encounter with its traumatic aspects. It is a topic that gives them a virtual encounter with death, and students, especially girls, point out that this arouses fear, but also curiosity. Students are interested in what is known as the phonography of murder. On the one hand, teachers are aware that it is a means which captivates students and arouses their curiosity, but on the other, they wish to avoid creating emotional blackmail, and they debate whether the message of Holocaust studies should be a message of life or a message of death. While religious and Orthodox education places strong emphasis on the spiritual heroism and the sanctification of life, in state schools, there is a substantial focus on the aspect of death. The subject of the Holocaust is of interest to teachers and students with a direct family connection, but is of less interest to students and teachers of Mizrahi origin who believe that the schools overlook the catastrophes and persecutions experienced by Jews in Arab countries. Some teachers of European descent with a family connection find teaching the subject too traumatic, with some even preferring to ask other teachers to take this segment for them. Holocaust education in the Arab community is complex. Teachers are ambivalent in their approach to teaching the subject and feel frustrated that the Israeli education system does not deal with the Nakba, which they perceive as equivalent to the Holocaust. At the same time, none of the teachers were willing to give up teaching about Holocaust despite these emotional difficulties. Holocaust education in all schools focuses on the aspect of commemoration and representation of the Holocaust and less on core issues with what really happened during the Holocaust. The results of the study show that the teaching of the Holocaust in Israel is undergoing three types of crisis. An epistemological crisis. Teachers maintain that ignorance among students has increased in recent years due to the change in the pedagogical approach, which provides a thin reference to the events of the Holocaust without referring to the broader historical and ideological context. The second thing is pedagogical crisis. The epistemological crisis leads to a pedagogical dilemma, whether the emotional, experiential, or cognitive aspects should be emphasized. The challenges are intensified with the passing of the survivors, resulting in the reliance on recorded testimonies, which many students find artificial and boring. In all schools, we identified a dilemma between the epistemological and psychological dimension, between commitment to teaching core knowledge of what really happened there and the need to protect students from that knowledge and avoid causing them mental harm. And the third one is an identity psychological educational crisis. Teachers and students do not understand why the subject of the Holocaust should be taught at all, except for teachers in the state religious education system who are very, very distinct about this point. They have a vague understanding about it, but they are confused and give different answers. Another major dilemma concerns the emphasis on universalistic or particularistic content. While in religious schools, there is an emphasis on the particularistic dimension, in state schools and schools in the Arab community, the emphasis is on universal aspects and the topic of human rights. In schools, Holocaust education is conducted most significantly as part of history studies, more than in other subjects like literature, art, citizenship education, or religious studies in religious schools. In all sectors, Students generally like the unit in history studies, but have differential attitudes in terms of its relevance to their world. For those participate in formal experiential activities like ceremonies, trips to Holocaust sites, museums, and education classes have a significant impact. Holocaust Remembrance Day has recently lost its power with a high absenteeism rate of students in some secular schools, and this should be further investigated. These findings raise the question of what steps should be taken to ensure the enhancement of Holocaust remembrance for the 4th and 5th generation. The hypothesis of this research project is that a new approach, which I have constructed and call it, that is the reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance, which is based on a critical, multicultural, universal human rights standpoint, can help to meet these new challenges. The notion of a culture of remembrance is inspired by the UN definition of a culture of peace, defined as a set of values, attitudes, and ways of life that reject violence, prevent conflicts by tackling the root causes in order to solve problems through dialogue and negotiation among individuals, groups, and nations. This is a hermeneutic process that involves continual adaptation, criticism, and reflection. To develop such an approach, a society must strive actively to promote knowledge, attitudes, and skills conducive to mutual understanding and fostering democracy. Thus, the main goal of the vital culture of remembrance is not just to focus on the past, but rather to provide a vision for the present and future, creating a potential to reinforce, extend, and further the aims of anti-racist education. How can we operate in action the concept of reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance? The reflective process includes 6 distinct phases. The first one is question, asking questions. The second one is explore, going more deeply. The third one is discovery, the revelation of deep dilemmas. The fourth is deliberation, discuss. 5 is debate, disputation and confrontation. And 6, management, how to manage difficult knowledge. The process of deliberation and reflection involves a multifaceted thinking and dealing with complexity in the context of the mediation of difficult knowledge for students and teachers. I would like to give you an example how the reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance operates and can be implemented in action. During the research, I not only interviewed the teachers, but also presented to them the Reflective Culture of Holocaust Remembrance Conference, which is both a pedagogical concept and a pedagogical method. And it was well received. Now, a few months ago, I will give you an example. A few months ago, I wrote a ballad entitled Ashtika Lebroit, which was put to music by Moshe Yosef, and it was illustrated by sand artist Ilana Yahav, and was sang by the famous Israeli singer Dudu Fisher. I would like to show you a specific case study of how I worked with it systematically with 8th grade teachers in preparation for Holocaust Remembrance Day. The ballad is based on a true story told by my late father, a Holocaust survivor from Transnistria. It deals with the starvation in the Holocaust. It tells the story of a brother and a sister in Transnistria during the Holocaust who were starving and went from door to door in search of a slice of a bread, ashtika lebroit, and no one wanted to open the door, and the ballad ends with a tragic death. One of the teachers wanted to omit the last verse of the song. I asked her, why do you want to omit it? She said, it's too difficult for 8th graders. I responded, it's a true story. that really happened when people were starving during the Holocaust. When we say the word hunger, no one understands its true meaning, ontologically and epistemologically. So therefore, it is important to understand what it means to die of starvation. Let's listen to the song. I would like to
There were once in Transnistria a boy and a girl. In times of dread, they were looking for a shtikele boit, a small slice of bread. There were once in Transnistria two siblings who were desperately sad. No one gave them a shtikele boit, a small slice of bread. A shtikele boit, a shtikele boit, a shtikele boit. How they wished they had a small slice of bread. A shtikele boit. Wandering from door to door, begging with eyes that were red, but no door did open for them, for a shtikele boit. And when someone cast some crowns, they said, "Thank you, mister. Here's one more slice for my brother, one more slice for my sister." Shtikele boit, a 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 shtikele boit. There were once in Transnistria a boy and a girl. In times of dread, they were looking for a shtikele boit, a small slice of bread. One day the brother came, all by himself, as white as the dead, too weak and exhausted to knock on the door for a small slice of bread. A shtikele boit, 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 a shtikele boit. The next day he was tossed onto a cart, his eyes empty and void, with all the children who used to look for a shtikele boit, a shtikele boit.
I think that the song is powerful, yet we need to discuss the teacher's opposition to teach the whole song using the reflective culture of a memory method. As indicators, we have 6 stages. Questioning whether or not to play the tragic ending of the song to the students. Explore, deeper exploration. The exploration attempts to translate the difficulty and put it into words. Should the students be exposed to difficult knowledge, which is death from hunger, or should they be protected from the knowledge, in which case they will not know what really happened there? And what does the term hunger mean in its ontological sense? Discovery. We actually have 2 artistic cultural means in the clip of the song that make it easier for us to process the difficult knowledge. The first one is the music, and the second one is the drawing of the art in the sand. This is an artistic form of expressing the horror in an easier way. We are talking about culture of remembrance, and the use of the culture is very important. It makes the hunger more accessible and mediates in a way that difficult knowledge can be digested in an easier way. The source of this story, I tell the teachers, is a true story told by my father. For years, my father was silent. And when he began to speak about what happened, he told me one story that he simply could not forget. This was a story that was hard for me to hear. And now, through the song, I'm conveying it to the general public. Many Jews were killed in Transnistria from starvation, cold, and diseases. When my father visited high schools as a witness to the Holocaust, he told this story with no intention of shocking everyone. He thought that in order for students to understand the great miracle that had happened to the survivors, they must be told what really happened there. Only after they understand what happened would they understand that we need to thank God and say prayer of gratitude, Birkat HaGomel. My father claimed that this story should be told together with the story of the personal miracle of redemption that he went through and the gratitude that he owes to God who saved him. This insight embodied a new revelation and discovery of how to grapple with difficult knowledge, to reveal the difficulty, but to attach to it an element of redemption and salvation which confers spiritual resilience. This is the discovery stage. One of the secular teachers told me, at our secular school, no one will relate to this. It's an explanation that can be given at a religious school, but what resilience and redemption can you offer to students at secular schools? At this point in the meeting, we began a new cycle of the reflective process. Stage 1, question. Is it possible to offer redemption to students attending a secular school? Explore. The fundamental question underlying the question is whether it is possible to grapple with difficult knowledge by transmitting the concept of redemption. What kind of redemption? Can secular redemption be identified that is distinct from religious redemption? Discovery. One of the participants discovers that in the secular world, it is probably even more difficult to grapple with difficult knowledge because there is no hope there. When there is no God, there is also no hope, says one of the teachers. This is a point of discovery. At this point, I present to them Ishai Mevorach's thesis in his book, Theology of Absence, about faith after the Holocaust, after the chaos, namely theology without God, which is difficult theology and difficult knowledge in itself, which doesn't allow man any redemption or escape from the absence of hope. The book is a theological treatise of a post-Holocaust world without hope, based on an analysis of postmodern theology. In contrast to Franz Rosenzweig's book, The Star of Redemption, in which postmodern nihilism leads to the hope, in Ishai Mevorach's analysis, nihilism leads to the abysses of oblivion, of despair and non-existence. It is a broken world without God and without faith that is ruled by absence and despair and intensifies man's helplessness and turns him into a broken vessel without hope, deliberation. The discussion begins with different types of theology and reaches another stage of a more in-depth discussion that asks the question, is it legitimate to expose a song with difficult knowledge to 8th grade students? Debate, disputation and confrontation. The debate stage necessitates the beginning of a process of raising all the possible answers in the group and open and launch a dispute. For example, in the name of freedom of expression, everything may be presented. And on the one hand, in the name of protecting the students, the distribution of songs with difficult knowledge that could harm their tender souls should be prevented. On the other hand, in the age of the internet and social media, we are exposed with such difficult content that the question arises of whether such content will actually break the tender soul of the person or adolescent exposed to it. Management, a stage in which a pedagogical decision is made regarding the direction and possibility of managing the pedagogical issue. Namely, how can we manage difficult knowledge in the classroom? The 3 stages can be carried out together simultaneously. But in my experience, it is very worthwhile to do the process gradually and divide it into 6 distinct stages arranged in ascending linear order. The first 3 stages prepare the group for the actual debate stage, which is carried out in greater depth. The poem was translated until now into 20 different languages: Arabic, Spanish, French, Polish, German, Romanian, etc. And I plan to craft some lesson plans which employ the reflective culture of remembrance concept and spread it all over the world and conduct a comparative study. And I hope that you will use it. You can access it in the internet. In the reflective culture of remembrance concept, we don't have solutions or closed answers. Many times we will have contested narratives where we will not need to answer, but rather manage the contested narratives. This is a new educational approach which grapples with contested narratives. Later, if we have some time in the Q&A section, perhaps I will ask my dear Palestinian Arab MA students, Naima Kaidan, to show you how she worked with this song, Ashtika Lebroit, systematically employing reflective culture of remembrance concept and method in an Israeli Arab school in Baqa El Gharbiya. In general, the results of the study show that it is not possible to talk about a single reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance or a single reflective pedagogy of Holocaust remembrance, but rather about several diverse reflective cultures in plural that need to develop a number of differential reflective pedagogy to comply with the changing needs of each Israeli education system, the Haredi, the secular state, the state religious, and the Arab. And in other educational settings globally. In addition, the teaching process must be applied with multicultural and intercultural competencies capable of containing the pluralistic multicultural diversity represented by various students currently studying in the education system in Israel and across the world. In most of the teachers' opinion, the reflective research method, the reflective culture of remembrance method, I proposed during the research process, creating a new consciousness and a fresh pedagogy. After the teacher underwent training in the method, the classes they taught, which we observed, had a more reflective, critical, and dialogical open nature, combining rational and emotional aspects and awarding the teachers with pedagogic and psychological resilience. This can assist to foster better social cohesion between the various segments in Israel's multicultural but conflictual society. The positive reaction was especially the case in the Arab and secular sectors, and especially in the Arab sectors, by the way. Teachers in religious state schools initially saw the reflective approach as threatening and likely to lead teaching to unwanted comparisons, while in the ultra-Orthodox sector, it was a priori difficult for them to deal with the reflective aspect, and they were less receptive. It will be necessary to build a modified, slower, reflective pedagogy that matches the needs of the ultra-Orthodox. We are situated in a new era in terms of Holocaust remembrance, and this means that we need to be courageous enough to raise up some new questions. HaShoah, the Holocaust, is becoming a non-issue among the 4th and 5th generation, requiring us to be courageous and creative enough to see how can we lead Holocaust education to some more inspiring and new path of reflectivity and relevancy. Thank you very much.
Professor Gross, thank you so much. I'm intrigued. I couldn't stop writing. I think it's a very important, first of all, it's a very important research that you're doing, and that's exactly why we invited you to give your talk today. I do have a few comments in the chat box. One of the things that someone is writing is that I think one important issue has to be addressed as to what the goals of the Holocaust education are. And I think that's one of the things that you mentioned, that many, I know researchers as well in Israel are saying, why teach this? Especially Yad LaYeled has that criticism. So I think maybe that's a major question after everything that you've talked about, to maybe give the goals. Why is it still important to teach about the Holocaust today?
Madin, perhaps we can give Naima Kaidan, my MA student. She's really a top teacher. She's a consultant in Baka El Garbia. She has a lot of experience. She used practically the method of reflective culture of remembrance and also the concept. And she's part of the research team, by the way. She's a promising scholar, and I would like her to present what she has done with Ashtika Lebroit. Please, Naima.
Thank you, Zehavit. Good evening, everybody. I'm so honored. I'm Naima Kaidan. I'm an educational counselor at the high school in Qasimi in Baka El Garbia. I used the method of reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance with its 6 steps. Let me explain how I used the song Ashtika Lebroit in Arabic school system while employing the concept that Professor Gross has developed. I would like to give you an example how I worked with the poem with my 10th grade students, which practically implement those 6 steps of reflection. First of all, I would like to read the poem in Arabic. I was so touched by the poem, and I would like to read it for you in Arabic. So it says like this. كسرة خبز كان يا مكان في ترانسستريا طفلان أخ وأخت كل صباح يخرجان ويبحثان عن كسرة خبز أشتكى لبرويت وما كانا يطعمان أشتكى لبرويت دارا بين البيوت والأبواب المغلقة يتوسلان أشتكى لبرويت وفي النهاية عندما كان أحد ما يهبهما فتاة الخبز كان الأخ يستجدي بعينين كثيرتين أنت für mein Schwester ومن أجل أختي أشتكى لبرويت. بعدها بيوم أو يومين صار الأخ يأتي وحده ولم يطلب المزيد بعد أشتكى لبرويت. بعدها لم يعد يطرق الباب ولم يأتي بعد ليطلب كسرة الخبز أشتكى البرود. بعدها كان هو في كومة على عربة مع كل الأطفال الجائعين الذين كانوا يفتشون عن كسرة خبز أشتكى البرود. So I will explain the stages. First of all, I read the poem in Arabic for the students. Then I asked them what is the message of the poem. And then we had answers. And then I asked them, what did you feel while listening to the song? I asked them to explore their feelings and write it down. I wanted them to write down, so we're going to use it after. Then I told them that this poem describes a specific terrible situation of hunger, which happened in Transnistria, which is a camp connected to the Holocaust. And that was a new discovery for them. This item they didn't know. So I asked them to write down again, what do you feel about the poem now when you know that it happened in the Holocaust? So after the stage of question and explore, we heard the different opinions. Most of the students, the majority of the students said that their feelings have never changed except for two students. Then I asked those who had different opinions and feelings, what did you think? And why? One of the students said that because of the political situation and what is happening in Gaza, it is difficult for him to identify with the sufferers of the Jews in the Holocaust. Most of the class disagreed with him. And yet we had now two different opinions, for and against, which is the stage of deliberation. And then we had a debate, a real dispute where some students support these feelings and others say that we are human beings and we need to treat everyone as a human being. Now, as a teacher, I needed to manage the conflict in the class and show them how we can try to manage different opinions and contain them, even if they are different from ours and represent contested narratives. At the end of the class, the students were very excited and felt that they had a meaningful experience from my point of view. What was important is the systematic way I conducted the reflective process with the students of reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance. And using the 6 steps helped me much more, which is the question, the explore, discover, deliberation, debate, and manage the discussion. Thank you.
So I want to ask you, Naima, one of the questions that I asked Professor Gross was, okay, why teach the Holocaust? What would be a goal? So I'm going to ask you, as a teacher in Israel, in an Arab community, what's your goal? That's the question from the audience, and I think it's a very, very straightforward question.
Okay, first of all, we have to know that Holocaust education is something important and is conducted and built in the curriculum, the history of curriculum in Israel. So students and teachers are teaching this because of because they have to, according to the, I have the words in Hebrew, so, and in Arabic. So
I know the curriculum. There's
yes,
they're required to teach it.
Yes. So
that's a fact.
Yes, this is a fact. And the teachers are using this because they want to teach students values, human values, and to share with them that bad and horrible and terrible things happened to other people. So we want to learn from what happened and to prevent happening another Shoah, another Holocaust for any other people in the world.
Thank you. Professor Gross, you wanted to add something. I heard you.
I was so deeply moved to hear Naima reading the poem Ashtika Lebroit and in Arabic. And you know, I thought to myself that my father is standing in heaven crying to see Naima, how she uses his story in such an eloquent way, in such a sensitive way. And I always say that we are the real future of the Middle East, and we have to take it into account. Holocaust education is a fantastic opportunity to open up for discussion everything without being politically correct. That's the future of the field. And believe me, someone wrote in the chat that perhaps we are comparing the Nakba and the Holocaust. No, forget about it. Naima didn't do it. She doesn't do it in her classes because we teach them. I think that their reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance with the 6 stages, which are so distinct and so systematic, can really help us to open up for discussion some fundamental issues that we have to open up. And that's a great opportunity. And that will give this topic a real future. Otherwise, believe me, I'm in the field, I'm sitting in classes, I'm interviewing students. All of you who are sitting here know exactly what I'm talking about. We have a real crisis. Let's try a new direction and let's be courageous enough to use it. That's the point. And I'm very happy that I was invited here to the Ghetto Fighters Museum, who is a very courageous museum. And I think that this is really the place where I can really declare and say, listen, we have a true problem, we have a real crisis, let's face it and let's cope with it.
So somebody is actually Tali Nates, who's going to be with us a little later on, the founding director of the Holocaust Museum in Johannesburg, Holocaust Center. So she's asking if this is a crisis in all parts of Jewish history or just this particular chapter. Is it just about the Holocaust that there's a crisis, or do you think there's also a crisis in learning about the history of the Jewish people in general in Israel? It's an interesting question.
I think that, I concentrate especially in the Holocaust issues. So this is really my topic, and this was really my main issue. I think that those 3 crises which I mentioned has a really impact on many other things that we are facing in the Israeli society and the Israeli educational system. But the Holocaust was a major constituent in the Israeli psyche. And I see a tremendous change among the 4th and the 5th generation. And I think that in a way, my research is a sort of an alert. Listen, we have to do something about it and to be very careful, because later on that will have some other implications, and my research in the future will deal with those implications. Now, I really concentrated on this specific issue, which is a major issue in Israel and all over the world.
I have to say that in the chat box, we do have many 2nd generation. We also have 1st generation, but at least 2 2nd generation have written specifically. Thank you to Naima for sharing in Arabic. And we're very moved. And I think that's a very important point here as well. When we talk about humanistic values, we have to be able to go out of what somebody called our own bubble of privilege in order to relate to the other. And I think that's an amazing way to do that.
By the way, Madin, I must tell you honestly that I have some other students from the Haredi school system and from the secular school system and from the state religious educational system with many wonderful case studies and which I could bring as an example. But of course, my top priority was Naima because I think that this is really an outstanding way to show how the system is really working.
I think we only have like 2 minutes left, but I have to say that the approach that you're bringing, it really allows multicultural dialogue as well. And I think that's something that maybe is missing in many ways. People, you know, they teach in their corner and they don't go beyond that. And I think here there may even be an opportunity for different schools, different teachers to actually go through the process together. Have you been discussing that at all? Maybe using sort of like an international reflection together in classrooms, and also meeting students from different perspectives as well.
By the way, Madin, you are raising a very important point and I want to say something. You know, I don't neglect the particularistic aspect at all. Some people think that, you know, you're going to the universalistic approach. No, I have many publications about these things, of course, and my UNESCO project was exactly about this thing, and this was very innovative 10 years ago. But nowadays, I really feel that this is a time to open up everything for discussion, even the particularistic aspects, and we cannot neglect them. And you know, I'm working also with Haredi teachers, I'm working also with the state religious education teachers, and we open up many things to discussion. For instance, how can you teach night, Elie Wiesel's night, in a state religious educational system? I'm using the reflective culture of Holocaust remembrance method and concept. And that gives a lot of opportunities, of new opportunities, you know, for the students. You know, I go into the classes, I open up everything for discussion. You know, they are going mad, the students. They like it so much. Finally, they want to open up what bothers them really about this specific issue from a particularistic point of view. I'm not afraid of the particularistic aspect, on the contrary, but I open it up, I open up everything for discussion. And that makes the whole teaching much more interesting and relevant to the students. We are talking about the 21st century. The students are not idiots. They are exposed to the media, to the internet, to so many questions and so many things and difficult knowledge. Come on, open up everything for them for discussion and see how Holocaust education becomes a matter of relevancy.
Yes, I see there's a very, I'll save the chat for you to look at, but there's some very interesting debates here about, you know, making, I think Naima is also reading it, about making comparisons between different cultures, of course, incorporating context as well. For example, with Naima, do you teach about the Mufti in Germany? I mean, and someone else is saying, you know, there's also the Balkans, that there were Sephardic Jews, but unfortunately from my experience, I understand that we don't have a real program today and it's not taught. So there are many different aspects. And again, I think if I want to close this session, you're actually providing an opportunity to find a way to communicate and to dialogue. And if we can't do that, then there's really no reason to teach about any history if we're not willing to dialogue and to ask those questions, those contested histories and narratives that are very, very visible in teaching about any historical event. So again, I want to thank you, Professor Zehavit Gross, for intriguing lecture. And I want to thank Naima for joining us and sharing from the ground, right? From the ground up, what it means to be a teacher today in Israel and to teach about the Holocaust. I think that you both brought us an amazing perspective. And of course, people are adding to my thank yous as well.